Banshee is by far my favorite frame to play lately, but you know, she's a little bit squishy. Now, I see a lot of people online that think that means you can't play her or any other squishy frame in high level content, but that's not true. I play her all the time in I play her solo in arbitrations, I play her in Steel Path, but the thing is, when I do that, I'm not playing her like this. Instead, I play her like this. The goal of this video is to show you the tools that you need to go into content like Kuva Floods or Steel Path and survive as any frame. I focus mostly on Banshee because that's what I play, but the stuff I'm showing you will work for just about any frame. First, I'm going to talk about the mechanics of reducing damage, then I'll talk about the tools you can use to further reduce damage, and then finally we'll end by talking about some synergies and other things you can use. And this is going to be a relatively complex video, and I want to be sensitive of your time, so I'm going to provide timestamps to each of those sections. If you're already familiar with the technical nitty-gritty of how armor and shields and all that stuff works, then feel free to just jump ahead to the tools section. This is the basics of how we take and reduce damage. You have your health, you run out of health, you die. Pretty basic. On top of your health, you have armor. Enemy armor has strengths and weaknesses. Our armor does not. Our armor is just a flat percentage damage reduction to all damage types. The damage reduction has diminishing returns the more armor you get. In practice, what this means is that the absolute least armored Warframes, like Nyx with 100 armor, she has 25% damage reduction. An unmodded Valkyr with 700 armor goes up to roughly 70% damage reduction. And then my modded Valkyr, who has almost double that amount of armor, that only goes up about 10% more to roughly 80% damage reduction. On top of our health and armor, we have shields. Shields do not get the damage reduction from armor, but they do get just 25 flat damage reduction for all frames. That sounds pretty good until you remember that the absolute least armored frame also has 25% damage reduction, so it's something, but it's not a lot. What shields do have going for them is something called shield gating. What this means is that once enemies do eat through your shield, your health will be invincible for a short time. In other words, you can't die in just one shot. Now, the shield gate won't be back until your shield fully recharges. However, as your shield does recharge, you have like a little tiny mini shield gate. It's like a little invincibility that lasts for less than a second. It's just to ensure that damage doesn't go through your shield and your health at the same time. So in this clip, you can see I'm just restoring a tiny little bit of shield using one of the Augur mod sets, and just that little bit of shield makes sure that this Bombard rocket doesn't one-shot me. On top of shields, health, and armor, you also have mobility. Jumping around reduces enemy accuracy. It doesn't do a whole lot, but it's something. Rolling reduces damage you take by 75%. In this clip you can see that I take roughly 1,000 damage per rocket, but when I'm rolling, I take significantly less. Okay, that's the end of the core mechanics section. Now we're going to move on to what tools you can use to make these squishy frames tankier, which is I think why you're watching the video in the first place. I'm going to show you multiple different builds you can use, but the important thing is the idea of the builds. And the main idea is that they all revolve around the mod called Adaptation. You can get Adaptation by running arbitrations. I believe it has a chance to drop on round B. Or, of course, you could also just trade for it. It's become pretty common now. It looks like you can buy it unmaxed for around 15 or so platinum, so it's pretty affordable. Anyhow, the way that it works is that Adaptation allows you to build up damage resistance to damage types that you're receiving. So if you're getting hit by a lot of toxin damage, it'll build up resistance to toxin damage up to 90%. And you can also be building resistance to multiple damage types as you're receiving it. Now, I didn't use this mod for a long time because it has one core problem. You have to get hit first, actually quite a few times, in order for it to build up damage resistance. That doesn't work as a squishy frame in high level content, because if you get hit 1 or 2 times, you're already dead. You don't have a chance to build up the damage resistance. With that in mind, Adaptation alone isn't what makes you survivable. You can't just throw Adaptation onto a squishy frame and think that you're good to go, because you'll still get 1 or 2 shot. Instead, you have to combine Adaptation with other ways of making you more survivable, and once you have another survivability option plus Adaptation, that's the combination that comes together to make squishy frames survivable in high level content. I'm going to show you multiple builds that I'm using to do that, but just to demonstrate the point, I'm going to show you the first build, and then we'll look at examples of how combining these defensive measures work. Arcane Tanker gives you 1,200 armor for a minute every time you call down your arc gun. This arcane drops from arbitration missions also. 1,200 armor is enough to allow a squishy frame to take hits to build up damage resistance with Adaptation. However, like I said, Adaptation alone is not enough, and also the 1,200 armor alone is not enough. To demonstrate the difference, I did some testing without any of these defense measures, and then with only Adaptation, with only the armor, and then with both of them combined, so you can see the difference. I'll show you the test done against a level 50 heavy gunner, and also against a level 150 heavy gunner.
I gotta hit that string, you better watch it. With a cat that attack with a full clip. I got the whip, got the pitch that I keep it undercover. All up in the cup, just to live it up. See the stone cold face, try to knock it. I keep it flat, never walk on the rocket. I got a beat in it, I got a grip in it. I got a beat, got a beat, got a beat, 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 beat. I got the ring full of bling, never dropping. I got a stash for the cash that I owe to my brother. All up in the cup, just to live it up. Look how the streets turn cold when I walk it. It's my rules, no man can stop it. I throw a kick so quick that I leave her in the gutter. Leave her in the gutter, 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 gutter.
Two thoughts on the test. One, there's a very noticeable bump in survivability when you combine the armor and Adaptation. Two, this isn't gonna make you a tank. You're not gonna be like Inaros levels of tanky, but you will be survivable, and with that survivability plus moving around and some way of restoring health, you can make it in high level missions. I'm going to show you some other builds also, but before we move to the other builds, let's talk about the pros and cons of the Arcane Tanker method. So the good thing is you can use this on any frame, anytime. It's very easy. It takes no setup, you just have to call down the arc gun and you have the armor. The negatives are that calling down the arc gun kind of like freezes you for about 5 seconds. So that's not always fun or convenient. And on top of that, you can't reset the timer. So it gives you that armor for 60 seconds. And if you call down the arc gun again within those 60 seconds, it doesn't reset the 60-second timer. Therefore, you have to let the timer run out, then call down the arc gun again, and then you get 60 more seconds. That might not sound like a significant problem, but when you are a squishy frame and you have those couple seconds of vulnerability without the armor, it can be a big deal. Also, it's an arcane, and not everyone has arcanes. I will be showing you a couple builds later on that don't require arcanes. In total, I think I'll be showing you 2 builds that require arcanes and 2 that don't. But I guess sort of like a small silver lining there is that while this is an arcane, it's not a super expensive arcane. I think maxed out it's maybe 100 to 150 platinum. And also the next build I'm going to show you too, it is an arcane, but it's not one of the super expensive arcanes. So speaking of the next build, the second combination uses Arcane Ultimatum. Arcane Ultimatum also gives you 1200 armor, just like Arcane Tanker, so the performance will be the same. However, they have different pros and cons. You activate Arcane Ultimatum by doing a finisher attack that kills the enemy, and that armor will last for 45 seconds. However, one big advantage is that you can reset the timer. So if you use a finisher attack to kill another enemy within those 45 seconds, it just restarts the 45-second timer. This means you've got no period of vulnerability where the armor is down, and that means a lot for a squishy frame. One downside is that sometimes this can be really hard to proc in arbitration missions, because they've got those arbitration drones flying around that make stuff invincible, you know? So usually it's okay, but sometimes it's really, I don't know, like you kind of panic and it's difficult to find an enemy that you can actually proc the armor from. And when the armor falls off in an arbitration mission with no revives, you know, that's an issue. Another downside is that you've got to make sure you're carrying a melee weapon that will do enough finisher damage to actually kill the target. If you do a finisher on an enemy but it doesn't kill it, then you don't get the armor. With that in mind, this is the build that I'm usually using. It's a dagger with covert lethality, and this build actually works really well for both finisher attacks and for heavy attacks. If you're going to try to use Arcane Ultimatum, you also need to think about how you're actually going to, open enemies up to finisher attacks. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. Some frames just have abilities or augmented abilities that open enemies up to finishers. The Naramon Focus School can dash through enemies, and that opens them up to finishers. The new Nightwave mod called Dizzying Rounds can open enemies up to finishers when you shoot them in close range. The secondary weapon called Zacti will always open enemies up to finishers if you do it right after the tiny little explosion. Health Conversion is a mod that it gives you 450 armor every time you pick up a health orb, and that stacks up to 3 times. You can get this mod from Cephalon Samaris, so keep doing those scans. This mod is really common on Necros because he spawns so many health orbs, but our goal is to make this useful in every frame. To do that, we're going to use the Sentinel mods called Synth Deconstruct and Synth Fiber. With Synth Deconstruct, there is a chance that every time you kill an enemy which your Sentinel has damaged, that enemy might drop a health orb. And then Synth Fiber, it's not really necessary, but it's convenient. Synth Fiber lets you pick up health orbs to give armor and heal your Sentinel, as well as you. And that just means that you can pick up health orbs even when you are already at max health. Out of all the combinations in this video, this one used to be my least favorite because Sentinels they die so easy. It felt like it was possible to use this in low levels where you don't even need the armor, but then in high levels where you do need the armor, you couldn't use it because your Sentinel was just dead all the time. However, that's starting to change. Sentinels now have shield gating, which does help them be a bit more survivable, but more importantly, you can actually use this on your MOAs also. Now normally squishy frames can't really use MOAs because MOAs die easily, but if the MOA is giving you armor through health conversion, then that armor also helps the MOA survive, and now you can use MOAs and keep them alive even on squishy frames. The MOA will continue giving you health orbs, which gives you armor, which keeps you alive, which keeps the MOA alive. It's kind of a beautiful little synergy. But at the same time, it's a little bit of a trade-off. I find that I can get the health orbs easier if I'm using a Sentinel. However, obviously the MOA is more survivable, so you have to kind of mess around with that and see what works best for you. The good things about this combination is that it doesn't require an Arcane, so it's much more affordable and accessible. Also, it doesn't require any sort of setup. You don't have to do an action in order to get the armor. It just kind of passively builds up. But certainly one negative is that it requires you to keep a pet alive, which is tough sometimes. And if that pet dies, you're not going to be getting that armor as easily, and you're probably going to die too. Another negative is that it's inconsistent. It's not like those other Arcanes where you just have that amount of armor for that amount of time. This one, it relies on the chance to get health orbs, you picking up that health orb, enemies hitting you or not hitting you to take the armor off. It's usually okay, but it's not as reliable as the other methods. Well, this is the one I'm least certain about. This is actually the one I was using the most before I made this video, but then testing to make this video showed me that the health and armor based builds are just so much better. However, I still feel like there is something here, and it's certainly the most accessible, cheapest, and probably the most convenient also. The basic idea is that we're using shields and a little bit of the augur mod sets to increase our shields, to regenerate, and then that plus adaptation, so the damage resistance from adaptation plus regenerating shields from the augur mod sets kind of gives you some tankiness. I guess really, gives you some tankiness isn't even the right word. You're not tanky at all. It just gives you some level of survivability, and you can usually use that along with defensive play, moving around a lot, and watching your shield gate and playing around with that. You can usually use that to make it through missions. Alright, the basic idea is that the augur mod set, it gives you a bonus where when you use energy, that can restore a little bit of your shields based on how much energy you used. There's also an aura mod called Brief Respite, which does a very similar thing. However, I like the augur mods more because they can go into overshields. Brief Respite can't do that. Now, when I first started using this shield plus adaptation build, I slapped on every augur mod that I could because I wanted as much shield regeneration as I could get. But really, it doesn't make that much of a difference. If you just have 1 or 2 augur mods, then that'll give you some regeneration, and that's really good enough. Just that little bit of regeneration can slowly build up your overshield as you're using abilities. Just using 1 augur mod can also restore that little mini shield gate, the one that you get before your shields fully recharge. And that can save you if your shields are depleted and you know you're about to take one more hit. You can just do 1 ability and then you have a tiny little bit of shield again. And the best news is that there's 2 augur mods you can just slap on your secondary weapon, and one of them, Augur Pact, it's actually pretty good. So you're not losing anything by doing this. So the pros and cons are pretty simple, right? Like, this is by far the most accessible and cheapest of the options. I'm sure that you have some of the augur mods already. And also, it requires no setup. You don't gotta do an action or anything, obviously you always have shields and you're building over shields as you play. The negatives are this is easily the least tanky version here. In fact, if you're playing, you basically can't play this against Infested. If you get hit with some toxin enemy, then you're wiped out. Oh, you know what? That reminds me. I originally started doing this because I got the Arcane resistance, which makes you resistant to toxin procs. What I thought that was going to do is make you immune to toxin damage. It does not. I still got insta-bopped by some enemies. It makes you immune to the toxin proc, but if an enemy does mostly toxin damage, or any toxin damage, the damage alone, without the proc, is still going to go through your shield, so don't try that. That's a quick way to fail some arbitration missions. I'm not sure what to call this section. This is just really quick, a couple of things that'll help you not get blown up. The first one, put radiation on your damn Sentinel weapons. Seriously, I don't know why are more people not doing this. It's just automatic crowd control, long-term crowd control on anything around you. So throw on electric damage and heat damage on your Sentinel weapon, those combine for radiation, and then build your Sentinel weapon entirely for status chance, right? That thing is not doing damage. At high level stuff, it's not doing damage. Don't build it for damage. Build it 100% for utility and for proccing status, proccing that radiation. And the good thing about this is that you can also combine that with viral, right? Because viral is toxin and cold, so you can throw that together with radiation, and those are easily the two most useful procs. I think the most useful weapons for doing this, the Sentinel weapons, are the, I don't know how to pronounce this, but Cryota, and the Hellstrom. Both of those are from Fortuna. They have high status chance, they shoot a lot, they're really, really useful. So this is one of the clips that I showed at the beginning, and if I just slow it down, look at how many of these enemies are not attacking me. That's because I'm using radiation on my Sentinel weapon. Makes a big difference. Secondly, make sure you're going in with some way to quickly restore your health. There's a ton of different ways to do this. There's operator arcanes, there's mods in your melee, so many different ways. For me, I like to use the Vazzarine Focus School. The dash will let you heal other things or yourself. That's just my preferred method, but whatever you use, that's fine. You just need some way to have burst healing. That's it. Use these methods, go out, and now you are prepared to use a quote-unquote squishy frame in any content you want. Have fun.